I'm going to go ahead and introduce Nikil, if that's cool, and then he'll introduce everybody else, and then I'm going to disappear. Hi again, Summer. Yeah, I'm Lisa. I'm here from N+1, co-hosting the event. We're here, obviously, on the occasion of Gabriel Winant's new book, The Next Shift, The Fall of Industry and the Rise of Healthcare in Rust Belt America, which is out this spring from Harvard University Press. It's a really remarkable and important book, as many people are saying. And I think I really just, encourage everybody to read it. And if you'd like to buy it, we're selling it through the N+1 bookstore. It's also available in many other places. But that's a nice way to both support the book and also support N+1. And now, I'm going to hand things over to Nikhil Saval, who in many ways is like a really perfect person to speak about this book and the issues it raises. Nikhil's a Pennsylvania state senator representing the 1st District and the co-founder of Reclaim Philadelphia. He's also been a labor organizer, a writer on like many, many topics, and was the co-editor-in-chief of N+1 from 2012 to 2019, where he really helped shape the magazine's commitment to publishing, writing about political movements and class struggle, including a number of amazing pieces by Gabe, which I really encourage everyone to read as well. So Nikil, I'm going to pass things over to you. And once again, thank you to all our panelists and to everybody who's here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, N+1, for hosting this. So I'm Nikhil Saval again. I'm the state senator in Pennsylvania and also the former editor of N+1. And we're here with, on the occasion, at least, to celebrate the recent publication of a really enormously excellent book called The Next Shift, The Fall of Industry and the Rise of Healthcare in Rust Belt America, by Gabriel Winant, who's here. But we wanted to, and Gabe knows this, that ever since the book, even before I read the book, honestly, I knew that it took place largely or rather its subject was largely in Western Pennsylvania, and concerned the rise, as the fall of steel, the rise of the healthcare industry, and not representing that region, but being tremendously interested in having friends and people organizing in that area, several of whom are here today. I just wanted to have the opportunity to talk specifically about this geography and have the opportunity to talk specifically about, what it means for the region, what from the lived experience of people doing the work, representing the region, doing the organizing. And so that's why we also have a state representative from the region, Representative Summer Lee, who is representing the 34th Legislative District in Pennsylvania. We have Lisa Frank, who is the Executive Vice President, Director of Strategic Campaigns at SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania. And we have a member, and I believe we have members in the audience of SEIU Healthcare, or worker, Nyla Payton, who is with us here. And of course, Gabriel Winant, who is the author of The Next Shift and professor at, assistant professor of history at the University of Chicago. So just as a kind of like ground rules, we're going to spend some time just like talking, like we'll talk about the book a little bit, but more as a way of getting into these issues. How did the fall of the decline of the steel industry and the rise of healthcare, what did that feel like? What was that experience like? How did that feel on the ground level in the cities where it was experienced? What is it like to work in the healthcare industry now? What are the struggles that people are facing? What do we need to be fighting for, all of us, at this moment? And so that's what we're going to be talking about. And I encourage everyone to post questions in the chat throughout the conversation. I will return to them at about halfway through the hour, and then we can address them to the panelists, and to also, if there are hopefully more members of SEIU Healthcare in the audience and just healthcare workers. So I'm really excited about this, and thank you again for hosting this. So I'm going to pass it first to just address my first question to Professor Winant, and I just want to ask you, since we're here, as it were in like, at least inhabiting for the moment Western Pennsylvania, inhabiting the region of the book. Talk about, if you can talk about just what your book is arguing. If you could talk about what the book is really about, but really, if you could, one of the things that I admire about the book is just that it really gets into the geography of North Braddock, of of Homestead, of the region, of the cities that it covers, of Pittsburgh. And so talk about, if you could talk about your book and what is particular, why you got interested in this region, and what does it reveal about what is happening to our society and to the nature of work.
Sure. Well, first let me say thank you, Nikil, for that generous introduction, for being here. Thanks to N+1 for hosting, and to Representative Lee. I'm so honored to have you on this panel here, as someone who I've admired you and your work and your organizing. And especially, I really want to thank, our comrades, leaders, organizers, workers, members in the healthcare industry, in SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania, from whom I have learned like everything that I know that is in this book, from talking to you all. And it really means a lot to me to have you, a number of you here with me in this conversation. I've been really looking forward to it. So it's just a tremendous, honor, and I really mean the book as like an act of my own solidarity with the struggles of healthcare workers. I'll try to be brief. So I grew up in Philly, actually, and I had never been to Pittsburgh before I decided I was going to write this book about it. But I remember growing up in Philly. I was living in New Haven Connecticut, when I first conceived of the project, which is a place that's pretty similar, actually, to a lot of it's another formerly industrial city where there's a hospital and a university that's a big employer. And, all of these cities, like, they have this story that we've all heard, we lost the factory jobs, but it's cool because now we have these kind of young creatives coming in to work for the university, work at, tech industry in the hospital, whatever. We're going to kind of rebuild around that. And I remember looking around, even when I was a kid in Philly, thinking like, I can tell something's not right with that. And in New Haven, when I was a little older, you can look around and you can see there are all these people, right, who make these post-industrial cities and their service economies, make them go, make them work, who don't look like they're computer programmers or doctors or, college professors. And I wanted to understand, okay, what actually has happened in these places that used to be centered on manufacturing? How did they go from what they were to what they are? Why is it that, these thousands on this urban scale, millions on the national scale of low-wage service workers don't seem to be part of the story of that change? Well, how did they get left out of it? Why did, when people lost one set of jobs, why did the healthcare industry in particular step in as a thing that was going to be so large to replace employment? And why is it such shit work for so many people? Excuse my language. And I don't want to kind of go overly into the detail unless people want me to, but I guess I'll just say the thing that I really found was that the healthcare industry got built up in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s to service industrial workers. So, it was the Steelworkers Health Plan that built all the hospitals, or expanded and modernized, and was the main revenue stream for all the hospitals and eventually nursing homes in the Pittsburgh area. And, steelworkers had good union protections, they had good insurance, and healthcare workers didn't. They weren't covered by labor law until 1974, for example. They were not, you could not unionize through the legal process till the 1970s in the healthcare industry. So by that time, a dynamic had already gotten set where some workers are deserving and protected, right, and others are outside of that. And as the population aged and people got poorer and sicker, all of that drives demand for healthcare and caused the system to grow and grow and grow and absorb more of the people who now needed new kinds of work. So that's the basic story that the book tells. And it's about how what a group of people who were consigned to that kind of margins of the economy once, healthcare workers who in Pittsburgh, overwhelmingly or disproportionately African-American, overwhelmingly women. So people who are consigned to the margins of employment and pushed into the worst kinds of employment, how that industry became the center of the economy over time, but brought that longer history of racism and sexism and exploitation with it into the present.
Thanks, Gabe. I just want to emphasize what a kind of like dramatic story this is, like, and just like how like revealing it is. And I want to just press on one point before we move on. One of the things that I thought was great about the book is just like, or what that was revealing about it, was that you really got into the geography of the region, and especially the way the workplaces, both steel and healthcare, were fractured and driven by race and gender. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, about how that process worked.
Yeah, well, this won't be news to people who remember the steel industry in Pittsburgh, but it was, African Americans had access to some degree to jobs in, unionized good manufacturing jobs, but overwhelmingly what men, especially until the 70s. And in particular, they tended to be pushed into the kind of marginal jobs within the steel mill. So in the coke ovens and the blast furnaces and the open hearths, the worst jobs to get, the most dangerous, and the first to be laid off and the last to be rehired. And what that meant was that as steel employment, it shrank slowly for a long time before it fell off really rapidly in the 1980s. And that pushed African Americans into low-wage service work faster and sooner than it did. I mean, it eventually did it to white people too, to some degree, especially after steel really collapsed in the 1980s. But it had this kind of racially uneven effect, and pushed women into healthcare jobs in the 70s and 80s to make up for the wages that their husbands or their fathers were no longer earning because they weren't getting jobs at the steel mill anymore. So what that meant was that as the industry grew, it could kind of take advantage of these displaced and marginalized groups of people, as I was sort of saying before, could draw on that pool. And you can find, I found records from the 70s and 80s of healthcare employers of different kinds saying, look, there are all these people who are desperate for work now. So like, we can hire them, we can grow. It's good. It's a good opportunity for us as the employer. And the last thing I'll say is that this is a national phenomenon. Places like Pittsburgh, places where manufacturing used to be at the heart of the economy, have much larger healthcare industries now than average. So like, if you look at the cities in the country that have the biggest healthcare industries in terms of employment today, the top 10 are like the Bronx, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Milwaukee, Buffalo. I mean, I'm roughly, this isn't exactly it, but you get the picture, right? It's like these kinds of older industrial towns that went through this transition, and as a result have this kind of disproportionately large but economically marginalized workforce. And I think, just to finish, that's true at the city level or like the regional level of Pittsburgh, but if you zoom in to a town like Braddock or Rankin or Homestead, or in Philly, Nikil, if you look closely at North Philly or West Philly, you'll find neighborhoods where 30 or 40% of jobs are in the healthcare industry. I mean, just like an unbelievable disproportion of people who are, working to keep the rest of us alive for $12 an hour.
So I think we'll return to these themes and these issues over the course of this conversation. I wanted to turn Rep Lee, it just so happens. I mean, like, this is that. I mean, at least, and just moving away from the book itself, but like to like the kind of like neighborhoods, that this is a lot of your district where, as I understand, where you grew up in North Braddock and stuff. So I'm wondering if you can talk in your just like about as someone who has come to represent the district, as someone who has come to, or is organized in the district, who is for a long time, how you would speak, what is your experience of the transformation, as in the 80s and 90s and 2000s of Braddock, North Braddock, as I understand you grew up in, but just the area, and how that's shaped you and your political trajectory.
Yeah, certainly. Good to see you all. Good to be here with you. I am from all of those neighborhoods that you mentioned. Every time you say it, it's a chuckle because honestly, these are the underlying kind of issues that really shape these communities in so many more ways than I realized. I definitely missed the 80s. I wasn't born until the very end of 87, but these are the themes that kind of shaped my community. So yeah, I did grow up, I'm from North Braddock. My mom and my grandma, they're from Braddock. And my grandma lived in Rankin my entire life. So these are literally the communities that I lived in. And they are, of course, Homestead is in my district. These are all the towns that, of course, were dominated by U.S. Steel back in the day. These are the communities, I always say, these are the communities that, built America because of, the steel industry, because of the robber barons. All of that is right here. And as I found myself getting into politics, I really quickly understood kind of the connection to these two things. I found it very interesting because as we talk about kind of the racial makeup of even just healthcare industry, I think about the racial kind of dynamic with the labor movement, particularly with the steelworkers, right? And as we think about the opportunities that different folks had when we were still in the heyday of steel, right? You can't ignore that, right? You can't overlook that. When I grew up, and I know there are folks on this call who could talk about it. Mr. Liu was on here and may come back, and so many others, right? Who literally lived those experiences where if you grew up in the Mon Valley, that's Braddock, Rankin, North Braddock, Homestead. If you grew up in these communities, you probably did not have a family member who didn't work at one of the mills, right? We all had somebody. The mills touched our everyday life. So whether it was, your family member who worked there or you who worked there, or even just like the schedule of the towns were around the mills. Like when one alarm went, they knew that it was a change of shift. Like my mom would tell you, well, that was 7 o'clock, or that was 8 o'clock. So their whole lives were kind of scheduled to the mill. But when it came to union protections, when it came to collective bargaining, when it came to how dangerous the particular jobs were, it's a fact that the Black folks who worked in that mill didn't have the same protections as some of the white workers. And they had some of the more dangerous jobs. Because they weren't in the union, of course, right? So we're talking about the healthcare benefits. We're talking about the pensions. We're talking about the ability to move families to communities that were a little bit farther away from the pollution, farther away from the environmental degradation, right? And that all kind of built up to where we are now, right? We have this constant struggle in Braddock and the Mon Valley between industry and being able to think about the economies of the future and kind of being held hostage by the economy and the industry of the past. And because we're a vulnerable town, because the black folks predominantly who were left behind because they couldn't afford to leave and relocate, the ones who are now occupying a lot of these service industry jobs, even the way we think about what is traditionally union ties down to that, right? Because when we think about what is the labor movement, we often do think about steel workers, we think about building trades, but we don't think about the healthcare union. We don't think about the service unions where most of these Black and brown and women are in, where most of our work, a large portion of our workforce are in, right? But don't still get the same, even just solidarity as other parts, right? And that's a lot tied down to the racial dynamic that we had in the Valley. So when I think about just how I got into politics, it was a lot of this. It was, the fights that I saw growing up. When we lost UPMC now, as you talk about, is the biggest employer in the state, biggest private employer in the state, and they're not even in Philly, Nikil. They're not even in Philly yet, but still are the largest private employer, and we're still in the fight for 15 years. Nyla will tell you about, right? We're still fighting for safe work environment. We're fighting to make sure that the workers there don't have medical debt. We're fighting against those sort of same things that we fought about, U.S. Steel with, but now in the service industry. But when we lost a hospital in Braddock, right, when the steel industry collapsed, when the community was intentionally divested from, when white folks and all the stores left the town, it was left kind of as a shell of itself, but we had a hospital. And when we ended up losing that hospital, as other folks can kind of speak to, we lost about 600 jobs. 600 jobs left our community. And those were folks who had to commute if they had transportation to other areas. But we don't have that many jobs now, we hear, at the mill. but that's still the economy that holds us up. That's still the thing that we can't fight back against, right? So it absolutely shaped, you know, my political trajectory, how I got into it, because really thinking about how these issues are all cyclical, you know, how the jobs that we have access to, where they're located, how, you know, US Steel and UPMC, you know, a life-giving industry and one that is an economic boost, how both of them have been able to exploit our communities. You know, Braddock, North Braddock, these areas, we've been at the intersection of kind of the abuses of both of these industries. And as industry changes, as we are able to think about the economies of the future, so too does our political kind of makeup. So too does the geography, the demographics, right? As we get more progressive, as we get more women and people of color even involved in politics, right? That's all tied. So yeah, very interesting, but it's definitely something that like I found myself like in the middle of, not because I chose it, not because it was, I didn't, you know, I'm not a professor in this, I didn't write a book, but I found that it was just my lived experience, and to deal in politics was to go head first into these two industries, right? The steel industry and the medical industry here at Pittsburgh.
Thank you, Repley. That is like, I mean, I think just the like the sense of like, again, I mean, I this is the term that keeps occurring to me, this sense of drama around this. Like this is like one of just the central experiences and, you know, it's sources of conflict, of, you know, of just life structure of our time, of many people's times. So I just feel like it's just it's like there's just, I feel like it's hugely important. And I want to return at some point to like the contemporary politics of this, but in terms of like what you are doing, you know, as in the legislature, what you want to do, but or what we want to do. And so but I, you know, I wanted to get to Lisa and to Nyla. So, and starting with you, Lisa, so as just if we can zoom out a little in terms of like the organizing challenges in the industry, what, I don't know quite how to put this question, but like, what you know, what is at stake? Like, what do you see in the industry from your position as executive vice president of SEIU Healthcare? Like, what is that? How is it changed? Like, what are the current, like, and what are the current struggles that you are facing? Just like in kind of broad, or in whatever broad strokes you would like to.
Right. So it's such a good question. It's a very good question. So look at, I think the organizing struggles and challenges, but also the path that we have to figure out how to tread is you know, it's pretty straightforward when you think about what are we looking at? What are we looking at? We're looking at, you know, a massive organization, is multiple hospitals that commands more wealth than, I mean, just here in Pittsburgh, right? It's $20 billion global health enterprise. The budget of the city of Pittsburgh is what, $500 million? You know, so it just it's just bigger than so many things, and a lot of that bigness is us. It's us through Medicare payments, it's us through Medicaid payments, it's us through our ever rising private insurance, if we happen to have that, which has meant that, you know, we haven't had a raise in, I can't count how many years, but, you know, it is also us in terms of the people who are doing the work, the people who go there every day to do the caring, and all of this is organized around the thing that is probably the most vital thing to people, which is their health and well-being, right? So at the very highest level, you would say to yourself, well, gee, $20 billion in global health, a workforce of 98,000 people, some of whom care a lot, you know, about them being, they want to be healthcare workers, is what I'm trying to say, even when Aldi's is paying more. We ought to be able to do something great, right? Like, shouldn't we do something great? Like, we should just do something great. And we're not doing something great. We're doing stuff that's pretty shitty, to the point that, you know, there are that will say, let's just say you believe that wages are the single most important determinant of health. Let's just say that you believe that incredible stress on the job is what makes people unhealthy and leads to the fact that here in Pittsburgh, we have the second highest in the nation, like rate of infant mortality and maternal mortality. Like, let's just say, you know, there are people who will say that these institutions produce as much illness as they produce health. All right, that might be a little exaggerated. That might not be a little exaggerated, but you get the point, right? And so why should we do it that way? You think, well, we could do better. And then that is going to bring you to the question of power, right? So the organization is structured in such a way that there are, and Gabe does such a nice job at this at the beginning of the book. I loved the beginning of the book. Like this organization has no employees because the corporation is structured so that no one's responsible for any of that, essentially. Where the money is not where the HR is, let's say. And so you have 4 pretty powerful guys at the top of a very tall tower making incredibly important decisions about investment, about wages, about who gets cancer treatment and who gets booted to the curb, about you name it. And we have very little input on any of that. Workers don't have their tremendously anti-union organization, fight tooth and nail, hire, you know, Saul Jackson Lewis. Nyla knows this, you know, her coworkers have been illegally terminated. These are tough battles to fight. There's no stockholders, you know, so you think to yourself, well, you know, maybe we could do like a shareholder kind of revolution and see if we could get a grip that way. They're the most unaccountable organization you can think of because they're neither publicly traded nor are they a public institution. So the struggle is always that struggle. How do we gain a toehold? How do we get power in this organization, which is our organization? These are charitable assets. How do we find power so that we can begin to make decisions that result in more health, more wealth, and, you know, and can we attack some of the inequities that are extreme inequities? They're regional inequities, they're gender inequities, and they are racial inequities. And we ought to be able to do better, but we're going to have to find levers. Is that a good answer to the question? Am I answering your question? Okay.
Yes, yeah, your answer is dramatically better than the way I phrased my question. Thank you. That's helpful. I want to, Nyla, I would love to just kind of, if I could turn to you, can you describe your work? I mean, I believe you work at UPMC Presbyterian, is that correct? Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. I actually have something written up, so go ahead and ask your question and I'll tell my experience.
Go for it. I mean, I would just be curious to, I would love to hear what essentially how you would describe your story.
Okay, well, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nyla Payton. For 15 years, I am the administrative assistant in the front office of the pathology department at UPMC Presbyterian. I have 3 children. 6 years ago, I began my fight with Hospital Workers Rising for 15 for all UPMC workers and union rights, because I realized that after my coworkers and I experienced unfair labor practices, I have a voice, but most importantly, I have the right to use my voice without fear of retaliation. Since finding my voice, I was one of the first hospital workers without a union to go on strike in 2016. Hospital Workers Rising made history. We won 15 for all UPMC workers, but because we don't have a union, we had to wait until 2021 for all workers to start at 15 an hour. Since finding my voice, I've testified before the Wage Review Committee, before City Council, and I've traveled across the country to challenge politicians to stand with workers and hold corporate giants like UPMC accountable. UPMC, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, pays us workers poverty wages. UPMC exploits Black workers by using us in their commercials, and they want people to believe that UPMC is a great place to work, when in reality, they are contributing to making Pittsburgh the worst city in the country for Black women. We are dead last in the categories of poverty, income, and health outcomes. Approximately 60% of UPMC workers are in medical debt. I'm currently in collections for medical bills accrued when I was pregnant with my last child. Because we fear high deductibles, hefty copays, and cumbersome medical bills, we don't go to the doctors like we should, only when it gets too bad to bear or when we can afford it, and sometimes that's too late. As a Black woman, quality health care is very important to me, especially being a Black woman in Pittsburgh. As a hospital worker, I feel that we should be able to receive affordable, if not free, health care and services, especially when my health insurance company is also my employer. Instead of providing affordable, free health care to us workers, UPMC directs us to apply for government assistance, in which many of us make just too much to qualify for. Workers, we need good jobs, union jobs. Pittsburgh is or was a union town, but UPMC will use the money that they can pay us for union busting and buying and building new facilities. After making $23.1 billion in revenue in 2020, despite the pandemic, UPMC still won't provide us essential workers with hazard pay that we deserve after putting our health and our families at risk of catching COVID-19. Workers need our jobs so we can take care of our families. Workers need living wages so we can live comfortably and spend quality time with our families instead of having to miss out on our family time because we need to work multiple jobs to make ends meet. We need employers like UPMC to respect us by letting us form a union without fear of retaliation. We need employers like UPMC to pay us living wages so we don't have to live in poverty. We need employers like UPMC to protect us by providing us affordable, quality health care so our families and communities can stay healthy. But most importantly, we need politicians who will have our back and not just provide lip service and tell us workers what we want to hear. We need actions and not words. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyla. That is hugely powerful, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you. Sorry, I'm very a little shaken here. I want to, see if we can just that. It's just so clear and so just blindingly clear what how much I think from this discussion, from what you said, Nyla, from what we've what the industry is doing to us. I mean, I think I forget who said that it's actually like an industry that in some ways is making us sick, right? It's making us sicker than we should be. The irony of the healthcare industry. What do we have we're organizers here, scholar organizers, representatives, what do we do? There's a question in the chat, and I'm going to start to move into this, which is directed for Gabe, but I think it kind of that UPMC is the question. It calls it the villain of the story of the next shift. What do we have to do? How do we change the situation for UPMC as in the legislature? How do we do it as organizers? And then just thinking about that, and maybe it's the biggest employer in the region, but we can use it also as a cipher for. I've got big hospitals in my district. It's I'm just wondering how we go at it. Representative Lee, so you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I think that, that's a perfect question. And I think Gabe's introduction really speaks to it in a sense, right? The first thing that we need to do is revoke UPMC's nonprofit status, right? You're not a nonprofit. You don't get to make a profit and then not, right? Because not only are they not charitable, because if your own workers can't afford the medical services, how dare you call yourself a charity, right? They're not a charity. They should lose that. They should pay taxes. The ways in which they make financial decisions that determine which communities they'll divest from and which communities they'll invest in, right? Braddock is one of the communities that was a part of that trend. And it's not just UPMC, right? We see, hospitals across the country closing, and Black and brown communities and rural communities. It's where we got the phenomenon of medical deserts from. But the next thing is, and it is what I was trying to allude to, right? And this is really Lisa's wheelhouse. I mean, I think it's all of our wheelhouse. It is that organizing part, right? Because aside from revoking their nonprofit status, you know, making them pay taxes, taxing the billionaires, all that good stuff, right? Aside from that, the real struggle, the real power struggle is really at the grassroots. It's how do we expand our labor movement to account for the changing industries in American society, right? Long gone are the days, just as we're talking about, long gone are the days where the labor industry is centered around those quote unquote man-killing jobs, right? It's not going to, the future of labor cannot be, will not be in oil and gas. It won't be in fossil fuels. The future of labor is not going to be in mining. It's not going to be in coal. It's not going to be in steel even. The future of labor is going to be in service industry jobs. It's going to be in teachers. It's going to be in grocery workers. It's going to be in all those different type of industries that have been traditionally left out of the labor movement because of the racial and gender divides, right? So I would say the first thing that we have to do is really reconcile the racial history of the labor movement in America at large. But really, we can look at right here in the Mon Valley in Pittsburgh in Western Pennsylvania as, you know, the poster child for that. If we are not valuing the work that Black and brown folks and women do, we don't see the need to extend the labor movement to them, right? And sometimes we don't get the solidarity that we need to build those labor movements, right? We see it with environmentalism, just like we see it with, you know, service workers and hospital workers, right? There is a racial and a gender undercurrent to that we try to ignore, that we try to tiptoe around, right? We want to talk about everything but race. We want to talk about everything but how the unions historically didn't want Black folks taking over. We want to talk about everything except for how blue collar is almost a dog whistle for white, right? We want to do all that. But what we don't recognize is that as long as we have a weak labor movement, which our labor movement will always be weak until we have expanded it to all of our workers. As long as we have a weak labor union, we can't talk about a living wage. We can't talk about Medicare for all. You know, we can't talk about free education. We can't talk about any of those big goals that we have in our progressive movement, infrastructure, a Green New Deal, you know, all of that is tied up in how robust our labor movement is, right? Because that's where our real strength is politically, is in the ability to move and to control the forces of the economy, right? So that's what I would say. My thing is that we need to really reconcile the racial and gender and misogynistic kind of history of labor. We need to get past it. We got to get over it. And we got to recognize that the future of labor is not just in those traditional kind of blue collar, hard hat labor movements and industries.
Gabe, did you raise your hand?
Yeah. Well, I really agree with what we just said. Thank you, Reckley. I just want to, I guess, build on that by saying, you know, something that's different about the service industry of different kinds, all these new parts of the economy where we have to rebuild the labor movement, is that something that makes them kind of different from steel or auto or mining is it's hard to automate them, right? It's hard to replace people with machines. They try, they find places here and there where they can do it, but it's not that easy for the bosses to do. And so what that means is to keep their margin up, to make their profit, they have to take it out of wages, right? Or out of the customer. They have to drive up costs, drive down wages. That's how they make their money. They don't make their money by getting more efficient. And what that's meant for the healthcare system as a whole is something I try to say in the book, is that, well, think of it this way. When your boss wants to make some savings on something, right? When they want to lower their costs on something, what do? They subcontract it, right? We all know that. We've all seen that. The whole healthcare industry is us as a society subcontracting a service, right? It's something that we do for each other. It's something that's a necessary social service. It's essential. We've said 1 million times this year, you know, for all the ironies of that, because we don't treat it like it's essential, but it's essential. It's a part of what makes us a society, what holds us together, that we take care of sick people and old people and young people, that we teach the young, right? That we take care of disabled. I mean, that's what makes us a society. And as Lisa was saying, that's where these institutions, these hospitals and nursing homes, it's where they come from, right? They come from us, they come from our property, from our money, from our labor, from our investment, but it got subcontracted. And that's what UPMC is. It's a giant subcontractor. It's what every nursing home is. So I think what that means is that we need to detach healthcare and care and services of all kinds as much as we possibly can from the pressures of profit making, right? We have to take it back to being something that we do for one another, a way that we take care of each other, part of our society. And for that, I think just to kind of more specific answer, I think the alliance of patients and workers is really, really centrally important, right? That the same people who drive down Nyla's wages and mess up her working conditions are the ones who send us those bills, those insane hospital bills, right? Or deny us treatment or close our hospital. And they do it for the same reason, which is that they're a subcontractor. And that means that the people who healthcare workers are taking care of and who are getting exploited in their bills, and the workers themselves have fundamentally a common interest in taking the profit out of this system. And that's a ton of people, right? I mean, healthcare workers are the largest sector of workers in the country. It's 14% of all workers. And like I said, in Pittsburgh, it's more. And in Braddock or in Rankin or Homestead, it's even more than that. And everyone depends on the healthcare system. So you start to put that together and you have some real numbers. And I think it's a question of how to actually make that alliance, make that coalition real, to bring democracy into the healthcare system as opposed to profit.
Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that democracy is the cure for the illness that ails us. No, I mean, I agree with that, and I think we've made inroads there. I really do. I mean, there are moments in our work here. I was scanning the list to see if Beth was here, and I don't think she was able to make it. But you know, where that coalition is exactly what has been built. And has made a difference for people. You know, when Nyla and her coworkers, you know, raised went on a strike to demand 15. You know, there were 2,000 people in literally minus 10-degree weather camping out overnight to insist that workers had you know, 15 and the right to a union. And you know, and we did stop UPMC from throwing out 182,000 patients with that coalition and with elected leaders who were willing to storm that boardroom with Nyla, who's on strike again, you know, to insist on those kinds of things. And, you know, came within I do see Mel here, and I see a bunch of people who worked on this, within a hair's breadth of insisting on a pretty robust community benefits agreement around one institution, one hospital that they were building that, you know, had bore what they were planning to do there, bore no resemblance to the community health needs assessment, bore no resemblance to what people in the community need, and they, you know, did not intend to hire anybody with decent wages or respect their right to form the union. And so I totally agree, that is the way forward. I also think that just a couple of things. The subcontractor relationship, I think, is a beautiful way to characterize it and really helps people get their heads around it. I like that. I'm stealing that. I think we also have to deal with that, because that spot is so sheltered. It's legally sheltered. It's ideologically sheltered. It's a difficult space to sort of storm the gates. And so I think the ability to figure out how to move some of that back into public control really does matter. We really have to get, you know, some like real democratic reins on that, because if we're only dealing with them as a, you know, in that kind of like limbo where we're neither shareholders nor are they accountable to our elected leaders, and that's the space they built deliberately. I mean, they set that up for themselves through, you know, Act 55. They tried to change our constitution. They like that space. That space is perfect because you're a subcontractor, but you also have guaranteed income streams in the form of Medicare or Medicaid. Like, that is the best place to be, to, you know, command the economy. So that's the only other thing I would think about it. And I think making elected leaders understand that, and which is hard for them. They tend to see these institutions as saviors oh, good, this institution is coming to buy my hospital. Oh, good, if we didn't have this, we'd have nothing. And then the state itself has been so hollowed out because that subcontracting has been going on under the also under the pressure of just stripping the public sector bare, that when you do talk to people and say, well, what if we just took this part back, or what if instead of outsourcing the next thing, housing, like now they're all going to be experts in social determinants of health. They're going to, we're going to do healthcare, we're going to do housing, we're going to do every goddamn thing people need, right? What if instead of alienating yet another bit of our economy to these institutions, we thought about doing it ourselves, like maybe we used to do once upon a time, or maybe like they do in California or something? The capacity is just not there. It's just not there. The state, the municipalities, they don't have the capacity or the expertise to do any of this stuff. So we got a long, I think we got a long fight on that front.
This is really great. I feel more inspired to go, I don't know, just go raise hell. There is a question in the chat that relates to the organizing question. It's specifically for Nyla, and it is just from our audience, and it's, what does organizing look like without an official union structure to fall back on? Who or which organizations or institutions are in solidarity with you, and who are the most effective actors in your coalition?
Well, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, so it's, how do you organize without an official union structure to fall back on? What organizations or institutions are in solidarity with you, and who are the most effective, what are the most effective parts of the coalition that you have?
Okay, well, us trying to organize a union without a union, to me, feels like we already have a union. It's just not legalized through UPMC. We are back, Hospital Workers Rising, we're backed by SEIU Healthcare PA, and they taught me how to be a leader, how to go out, raise my voice, inform the people of what's going on in our hospitals and why we need to have a union. I think that's pretty much it. Unless there's another question I didn't answer.
I guess one part of the question for it is also like, what do you have, like community members? Are there people outside who tend to be, who you've either like brought into solidarity with you or to work with you into your coalition, or like have tended to be supportive? Like where else does the support come from?
It comes pretty much from everywhere. Like people who see us actually just trying to form a union and we don't actually have a union going on strike. Like, is it One Pittsburgh helps us, the politicians, like State Representative Summer Lee. Everybody sees us trying to do stuff and they all come to help out. Like SEIU Healthcare is the biggest one that works with us though.
Yeah. It does sound like the backing, even if the backing of union power is a big part of it, but also just bringing politicians and sympathetic figures in train is important.
Yes.
And community organizations.
Hey, Nikki.
Sorry, go ahead, Revoke. Yeah.
I was about to say, can I just say that when I first started talking about this, I had completely, we've been working with Nyla and all the rest of the Hospital Workers Rising and SEIU Healthcare PA. I had completely forgot that the Hospital Workers Rising weren't already a part of Healthcare PA. I know in my head, that the whole fight is for the union, right? But even still, I had almost completely forgot that we had not already achieved that, which is also a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing, but it also kind of speaks to how absurd it is that, UPMC, again, the largest employer, are still trying to unionize. That it speaks to the absurdity of that. But I will say that it does speak to the solidarity, that is coming from SEIU, and really just the endurance and the persistence there to continue to unionize. Nyla are not going to talk about it. These folks have faced retaliation. They've been fired multiple times. The backlash has been fierce. It has been nasty. And they keep fighting, right? They have every reason to stop, right? They have every reason to not want to go up against this corporate giant But they do, and they keep showing up, and they keep on fighting, right? So I just had to throw that out there.
Can I throw one thing into, because it sounds, and I'm so proud that I'm part of a union that, does that. I am, we also have to. Do you know what I mean? So like the question kind of presupposes that the union is supporting the struggle of non-union workers within UPMC, but you could reverse that. You could reverse that entirely, right? Because if the workers at UPMC are not in struggle, and as Summer says, I mean, it takes an incredible amount of courage, and it takes an incredible amount of heart. I mean, managers, they say things that are they're just evil. I'm just going to digress for a second, but we had a group of ministers, and the faith community has been terrific, and really, really brave at various times. So a bunch of them went and got arrested. And as a result of that, they managed to get a meeting in the C-suite, and in that meeting, what they were told was that $15 an hour is complete nuts. That's never going to happen, and that if people had wanted that kind of remuneration, they should have made better choices in their lives. So this is the mentality, right? Like I mean, just like stop and think about that. And think about it against the backdrop of the story that Gabe has told, and the just sheer, I just don't even know how to describe it, right? So that's the environment that you are standing up in. You're not standing up in an environment where people are like, we appreciate your work, and they say that too, and they give people cookies and things like that. But it's really, so the fact that workers will do that, I mean, we're all, what choice do people have but to back them? Yeah. If we want to have good health, if we want to address structural racism, if we want, women to have access to what choice is there? So I just wanted to kind of correct that perception. Like we all have to do it together, because there is no way forward if we don't tame these forces.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for that clarity around this. But I mean, from everyone, I mean, that's in terms of there's as a kind of like follow up to that, there's a question that a couple people have asked in varying ways in the chat, and I'm going to try to see if I can fuse them. But it's basically about hierarchies within healthcare institutions. So, one version of this is that hospitals have intricate hierarchies of technical and professional skills. In many places, these radiations reveal racial hierarchies. Someone asked about the role of doctors in the healthcare movement, also in that hierarchy. So I'm wondering if and then someone else has asked about who are the opponents within the healthcare industry division of labor. I guess so the broad question is like, how does that affect the organizing? How does that affect the policy? How does that affect the work, that hierarchy? And this is really for everyone.
I kind of want to toss that one to Nyla. Nyla, if you had to describe who works in what part of the hospital, where are you finding, Black people, where are you finding white people, where are you finding people whose pictures are on the wall? Like, how would you describe that?
Okay, can you rephrase that question?
Sorry, I think the person who asked the question is just kind of interested in like what are the kind of like hierarchies within the hospital? What are the departments where you're likely to find women and Black people concentrated? Where are the departments where you're likely to find neurosurgeons concentrated? What is that like? Like how does that all kind of play out inside the hospital?
Well, I noticed that there are more Black and brown workers in more so transportation, like transport and housekeeping. And those are some of the bigger industries in the hospitals, because without them, essentially the hospital could shut down. As for me, I work in pathology. And a lot of the other administrative assistants, they're what we would say more well off than I am. And that's why I think I'm more focused in this fight than what they are, because they're scared of the union. Like, I'm not sure how they grew up, but my dad, he was in the union when he was a firefighter for the city of Pittsburgh. So I always thought and grew up to think that unions are a good thing. And I remember one point in time, one of my supervisors came and told me that they come. Did it go off? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. But yeah, they said that you'll get union workers knocking at your door, and it's like, don't answer, don't. Why not? And then when they actually knocked on my door and I answered, that's when I realized, like, okay, I have rights. I actually found out about me being in your book through my former chairperson in my department. He sent me the copy, and he was like, you're getting famous. And I'm like, I'm not really trying to be famous. I'm just trying to put the word out. And it amazed me because he was one of my biggest supporters while he was working, as the chairperson in my department. Then I have other doctors who, because I mentioned your book, he purchased the book and he's currently reading it right now. And it's like, you could see the difference in like I have a lot of friends in housekeeping and a lot of which they are, part of the hospital workers movement, even friends in dietary, like the dietary workers, like I'm not sure how I want to say it, but it's a lot of diversity, but we're not included as far as, the healthcare industry should go. Like, I even did a module today that did, like, for inclusion. And it's just like, I was reading these and it's like, yeah, the models that you're providing us, they are what we should be expecting. But as an employer, are not providing the same, core values that you're expecting from us workers.
Thank you, Nyla. So that was, so I think what you've said and what everyone has kind of said here, I mean, is just both. We've talked about we've talked about the great, like the obstacles that we're all facing here, like within the within the industry, but we've also gotten clarity, I think, on what it is that we need to do, the real stakes of what is happening, who is fighting, and what all of us are fighting for. And I just really want to thank all the panelists here and close this out. Thank you, Nyla. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Rep. Lee. And thank you, Gabe. We started by talking about a book. We've gotten to which is exactly where I hope we would go. Just the fact that this is the book. This is a book that is about just real live issues that have huge stakes across in our state, in the Mon Valley, in our region, and across the country. And I'm just, I think everyone, attention must be paid. So I just want to thank everyone. Thank you, N+1. I'm going to toss it back to Lisa to thank you for this panel. There's a lot more to say, obviously, but
thank you, Nikil.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, just thank you all so much. This was really amazing, really moving. Absolutely, like the most exciting way to talk about a book, I think. Congratulations to Gabe, and thanks Nikil, thanks Nyla, Lisa, Rep. Lee, and definitely, yeah, buy the book if you can. But thank you all so much, and have a great night.
Thanks everyone for coming too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for your work.